A former mission specialist who trained on the Mars crew rotation list has finally said out loud what the agency would not. In a sit-down interview released a few weeks ago, he described, in careful, measured language, the real reasons a crewed Mars attempt he was part of was quietly shelved. He did not raise his voice. He did not shout about cover-ups. He simply explained, step by step, why a mission the public was told was on track had already been abandoned behind closed doors, and why the timeline we kept hearing about in press releases had no relationship to the timeline the astronauts were seeing inside the building. His account lines up with pieces of testimony from two other retired flight crew, and together they paint a picture that is far messier than the version that made it into the evening news. Let's be clear from the start. No astronaut has ever walked on Mars. That part everyone agrees on. But over the past 15 years, multiple crewed Mars missions have been announced, budgeted, and planned. Each was treated by the public as a confident march toward launch. And each, one by one, quietly slipped. Dates moved. Crew assignments got shuffled. Press conferences became less frequent. The explanations, when they came, cited budget realignments, technology maturity, congressional priorities. All of that is likely true. But according to the astronaut speaking now, none of it tells the whole story. He joined the program with the kind of resume you would expect. Engineering degree, test pilot hours, 2 long-duration stays on the space station. He was part of a small cohort that, around a decade ago, was briefed on what a human Mars landing would actually require, not a marketing version. The real engineering document. And according to him, that document made several people in the room stop talking. The first problem was radiation. Everyone knows deep space is not healthy. But the numbers on that table were more specific than most people outside the program have ever heard. A round trip to Mars under realistic shielding would expose each astronaut to somewhere between a lifetime's worth and several lifetimes' worth of the radiation dose normally allowed for a career. Mission planners had spent years searching for ways to bring that number down. Some options, like a thicker hull, added too much mass for any existing launch system. Others, like magnetic shielding, worked beautifully on paper and poorly in tests. There were promising ideas on the table, but nothing that closed the gap with acceptable confidence. He said, and this is a direct paraphrase, the team knew they could send humans to Mars and back. They simply could not guarantee those humans would still be healthy in 10 years. The second problem was landing. People do not realize how brutal an entry at Mars is. Mars has an atmosphere, but not a thick one. It is too thin for parachutes to slow a heavy vehicle all the way to the surface, and too thick to ignore with rockets alone. Every successful robotic landing has used a complicated combination of heat shield, parachute, and last-second retro thrusters. Doing that for a capsule carrying humans with the weight of life support and return supplies is in a different league. He explained that the program had run computer simulations of hundreds of thousands of entry trajectories. The loss of crew numbers kept coming out in a range that made people uncomfortable. Not 1 in 10,000. Not 1 in 1,000. Something much less reassuring than that. Engineers believed the number could eventually be improved. But engineering eventually does not line up with political by the end of the decade. The third problem, he said, was the one the public understands the least. It was not the trip out. It was the stay. A Mars mission, under physics as we currently know it, is not a 2-week visit. The planets have to align. Crews would need to remain on the surface for over a year, waiting for Earth to swing back into position. That meant setting up a habitat, growing or recycling water, managing psychological strain, handling medical emergencies hundreds of millions of miles from any hospital. It meant a level of self-sufficiency that no crewed program had ever attempted. Every system had to work, first time, for over 500 days. The mission simulations they ran on Earth, in analog habitats in deserts and Arctic bases, kept producing failure modes no one had expected. People argued. People got sick. Equipment broke. and Earth was right outside the door. According to him, the turning point came during a review where the program's leadership asked a simple question. If we launch this mission and the crew reaches Mars, and something goes wrong in month 3 of the surface day, what exactly do we do? The answer, in plain language, was nothing. There was no rescue. There was no backup vehicle that could reach them. There was no rapid resupply. The crew would be on their own, with whatever they had, for as long as it took for orbital mechanics to allow a return. The room went quiet. That, he said, is the moment a lot of people realized what they were actually signing up for. He was careful, in the interview, to separate what is possible from what is ethical. He believes a Mars landing is possible. He has said so in lectures. But he also believes the risk profile of the mission as designed was quietly decided to be unacceptable, and that rather than say that in public, the program was allowed to drift. New timelines were announced. Old ones were quietly removed from websites. The public, he said, was never lied to exactly. They were simply not told how much the internal confidence had shifted. It is worth noting that not everyone in the space community agrees with this framing. A former administrator, speaking at a conference last year, argued that the delays are nothing more dramatic than the normal grind of a hard engineering project meeting real-world budget constraints. In her view, Mars missions have always been a decade away because they genuinely are a decade of work, and each decade that passes is filled with actual progress, not cover-up. She pointed to the test flights, the life support advances, the materials research. From her angle, the slippage is not a sign of failure. It is a sign that people finally take the problem seriously. That is a fair counterargument. And it is probably at least partly right. But it does not explain why multiple astronauts across different agencies have now privately said the same thing. Internal risk assessments made them uneasy. Mission timelines did not match the public narrative. Key hardware was not where it needed to be. When enough people say that, from enough different rooms, the pattern gets harder to dismiss. The astronaut speaking now is careful about language. He does not say the mission was sabotaged. He does not say the agency lied. He says the program was quietly paused because the honest answer to, "Are we ready?" was no. And no is not a word that gets a lot of airtime in a field built on optimism. There is also the financial layer. A crewed Mars mission, on any credible estimate, would cost hundreds of billions of dollars spread across a decade or more. That is a scale of commitment no legislature has actually approved. Every announced Mars plan over the past 20 years has been funded, in practice, at levels far below what its own architects said it needed. So even setting aside radiation, landing, and stay length risks, the political machinery has not quite been willing to pay for the mission it keeps promising. The astronaut was blunt about this. "We were told we were going," he said, "but we were never given what going would actually require." There is a thread, a more unusual claim woven through his account, one that has made it into a lot of the online coverage, and it deserves to be handled carefully. In passing, he mentions that during one late-stage review, data from a precursor robotic mission was presented that changed how certain planners thought about long-duration stays on the surface. He does not elaborate. He does not name the mission. He does not say the data was classified. He simply says it prompted a reassessment. Some commentators have taken this thread and run with it, suggesting that something was found on Mars that made the agency reluctant to put people there. He does not say that, and he has pushed back at interviewers who have tried to put that phrasing in his mouth. What he says is more modest. New data came in. Risk calculations shifted. Plans changed. That may be all there is to it. A responsible look at this story has to accept that. We may never learn the full contents of those internal reviews. Agencies keep a lot of their engineering discussions close, not because of conspiracy, but because early, uncertain data gets weaponized quickly in public. That is a real consideration. It also means that stories like this one, told by former crew members, are some of the only windows outsiders ever get into what the internal picture actually looked like. So what does it mean for the future of crewed Mars exploration? In the honest read, it does not mean Mars is off the table. It means that the version we kept being shown, the confident, nearly there version, was not the version engineers were living with. A real Mars mission will probably still happen. It will require new propulsion technologies that significantly shorten transit times, better radiation shielding than anything currently deployed, and a level of surface autonomy that is only now being tested in long-duration simulations. Those things are being worked on. They are not ready yet. And the astronauts who speak openly about this now are, in a sense, doing the public a favor. They are making the real difficulty visible, so that when the mission finally does launch, everyone understands what it actually took to get there. His final statement in the interview was quiet and almost tender. He said he still wants humans to stand on Mars in his lifetime. He does not regret the program. He does not blame the engineers or the administrators. He just wishes the public had been let in on the hard parts, because the hard parts, he said, are where the real story of space exploration lives. Sanitizing the struggle only sets expectations the mission cannot meet. There is something deeply human in that. Every generation dreams about the next frontier. We have always been a little too quick to promise what we cannot yet deliver. That is how space programs have always worked. Dream big in public, sweat the engineering in private. Sometimes the private engineering says not yet, and that message takes a long time to reach the surface. So, when you hear, in the coming years, that a new Mars timeline has been announced, hold it a little more lightly than you might have before. Not with cynicism, with realism. The people who really know what the mission requires are not the ones giving press conferences. They are the ones in the back row, quietly doing the math. According to this astronaut and the others who have started, slowly, to speak, that math has been telling the same story for a long time now. We can go to Mars. We just have not yet built the version of ourselves that can survive the trip. Whether the next decade changes, that is one of the open questions of our time. It is a question worth watching, with eyes wide open, and with a little more honesty than the public conversation has offered so far. There is one more layer to this story that deserves attention, because it gets lost in the hype cycle and the counter-hype cycle alike. A significant part of the decision to shelve the mission, according to the astronaut, was not technical at all. It was medical. The long-duration health data coming back from the space station over years of continuous crewed operation had been telling a consistent and uncomfortable story. Astronauts who spent 6 months in microgravity were coming home, with measurable changes to their cardiovascular systems, their vision, their bone density, and their immune function. Most of those changes were reversible, given enough time back under normal gravity. Some were not. And critically, the data set for anything beyond 6 months was very thin. A Mars mission would require crews to spend a total of roughly 2.5 years in some combination of microgravity and Martian gravity, which is about 38% of Earth's. No one actually knows what that does to the human body, because no one has ever done it. There are educated guesses, there are simulations, there are animal studies. But when the agency's medical team walked into the risk review with their best honest numbers, they were asked a question that nobody really wanted to answer. Would you sign off on sending a human being into an environment where the long-term health outcome is genuinely unknown? The medical team, to its credit, said that they would not sign off yet, not without significantly more data. That answer carried weight. It was one of several quiet signals that pushed the mission timeline outward. There was also the question of crew selection, which the astronaut described in a way that stuck with a lot of listeners. He said that when the program got serious about picking a crew, they realized they were not choosing astronauts in the traditional sense. They were choosing the first human beings to voluntarily leave the reachable portion of the solar system for an extended period. That is a different decision. The psychological profiles needed, the personality compatibility required, the ability to function without any real-time contact with home. Those were all unknown territory. They began running long isolation studies. Volunteers spent months in sealed habitats with no outside contact. The findings were sobering. Even highly trained people, in optimal conditions, experienced cognitive drift, mood disturbances, and interpersonal friction. On Earth, those problems are manageable. On Mars, they could compound into something much harder to fix. The astronaut was thoughtful about this piece. He said he did not want to make it sound as if humans cannot handle the trip. People have handled harder things. But he also did not want to minimize the scale of the psychological challenge. A crew going to Mars will be, for months, genuinely alone. There will be no rescue. There will be a communication lag of up to 20 minutes in each direction. There will be, at times, no one on Earth who can help. That is a kind of isolation that has no real analog in human history. And the people training for it knew it would test them in ways that no simulation could fully anticipate. Against all of that, the agency still insists that Mars is on the agenda. Architectures are being studied. New rocket hardware is being tested. International partnerships are being negotiated. The difference now, according to the astronaut, is that the conversation inside the building has become more honest than the one outside it. Engineers are openly saying that the mission, as currently imagined, is probably a 20-year project rather than a 10-year one. Planners are admitting that the first crewed landing will most likely involve a smaller crew, a shorter stay, and a more conservative profile than the ambitious early proposal suggested. That is not retreat. It is maturity. He ended his interview with a memory. He recalled standing on a beach as a child, watching a rocket launch roll a column of light up into the pre-dawn sky, and feeling that whatever was happening up there was the most important work humans did. He still feels that way, he said. He just wants the work done with more honesty than it has been. A generation that has been promised Mars and not being given the full picture deserves, at some point, to be told the real story. That is what his interview, taken as a whole, was trying to do. Not to tear down the dream, to make it sturdier, to remove the marketing varnish and let the actual engineering stand on its own feet. That is a contribution, whether or not it gets a parade. So if the next Mars announcement arrives with more caveats than usual, if the date slides by another handful of years, if the proposed crew size shrinks, take it as a sign, maybe, that the quiet corrections from people like him have finally begun to reach the public narrative. That, in the long arc of space exploration, may turn out to be the most meaningful contribution he made. And it came not from a launch pad, but from a chair in an ordinary room saying calmly what a lot of people inside the program had been waiting to hear somebody say out loud. Looking forward, the realistic path to a crewed Mars mission probably runs through a sequence of stepping stones that the public rarely hears about. A permanent human presence on the moon, used as a shakedown environment for long-duration life support. Nuclear thermal propulsion, which could dramatically cut transit times and with them the radiation exposure. Improved closed-loop agriculture, so that a crew can feed itself for years without constant resupply. New medical protocols for long-duration isolation, probably including artificial intelligence systems that can act as a kind of shipboard diagnostic partner. None of that is glamorous. All of it is necessary. And it is the kind of slow, unromantic work that makes the eventual landing possible, if it happens at all. The astronaut, when asked what he would tell a young person who still dreams of walking on Mars, gave a simple answer. Become an engineer. Become a doctor. Become a biologist. The people who actually get humans to Mars, he said, will not mostly be the ones in the helmets. They will be the ones in the labs, building the systems that make the trip survivable. The helmets come last. That is a good note to close on, and a more honest one than most of the inspirational material we have been handed over the years.